Mr. President.
I recognize the senator from California.
Mr. President, I too rise in opposition to the reconciliation bill before us. But before I get to my objections over the substance of this historic attack on working and middle-class families, I want to speak for a minute as the ranking member of the Rules Committee. And I need to address how Republicans are abusing the process to get here. They're breaking the Senate rules to hide the true costs of the bill. For the second time in just 6 weeks, the Republican majority is going nuclear on the Senate rules. And they're doing it with the same purpose: to avoid the 60-vote threshold of the filibuster in order to pass a very unpopular agenda. Now, I know oftentimes we're advised against getting into quote-unquote process, because most people may not care about process or understand process, but in this particular case, it serves to underscore the significance of the damage that this bill represents, the procedural lengths to which the Republican majority is going to try to get this done. And I do have to say it's so surprising, because it was just in May that Senate Leader Thune unequivocally said, quote, "While Republicans are in charge, the legislative filibuster will remain in place," end quote. If we go back to January, he was asked about this because folks kind of had a sense that this might be coming. He said then about overruling the Senate parliamentarian, quote, "That's totally akin to killing the filibuster. We can't go there. People need to understand that," end quote. But now Republicans are trying to do exactly that, to hide behind the technical language of Senate procedure to harm working families. And no, like I said, it's not the first time. Just last month, Republicans voted to override the very plain language of the Congressional Review Act. And they voted to overrule the parliamentarian to repeal California's Clean Air Act standards with a simple majority vote. Fast forward to today, they're running the same play, this time with trillion-dollar consequences, not just air quality and public health consequences. See, colleagues and folks watching at home, budget reconciliation is the most powerful expedited procedure statute on the books. You can do a lot with a simple majority and avoid the filibuster, but you have to do it by the rules of reconciliation. But today, the Republican majority wants to extend trillions of dollars of tax cuts for President Trump's billionaire friends and extend those tax cuts permanently. That's not just terrible, terrible policy. It's against the Senate rules. The Congressional Budget Act says clearly that reconciliation bills cannot increase the debt beyond 10 years. Now, it doesn't take a Nobel Prize-winning economist to know that a permanent trillion-dollar tax cut would do exactly that. And so once again, following the same playbook they did last month, the majority is going to twist the rules to try to find a way. They're again ignoring the guidance from the parliamentarian's office that doesn't fit their agenda. And they're setting yet another new precedent for this body. Not only continue to overrule the parliamentarian, but to ignore adding trillions of dollars of costs under the, quote, current policy baseline. As we did during the Clean Air Act debate last month, I and my Democratic colleagues will once again remind our Republican colleagues that sooner or later Democrats will be back in the majority. By then, the American people will have felt the pain of this bill, but we'll make sure that they understand just how hard you tried to work to hide it from them. Democrats will not let the American people forget what Senate Republicans do this week. Now on to the substance of budget reconciliation. Mr. President, how many times have we heard the Trump administration these past few months say that they're focused on fraud, waste, abuse? Now, these are the buzzwords that they turn to when they're trying to bat away questions or when Americans are trying to get clarity on whether the life-saving services that they depend on are about to get cut. But in reality, what we're seeing happen this week is one of the biggest acts of fraud in American history playing out right before our very eyes. With the bill under debate today, and it is past midnight, so we're into Tuesday, so I can still say today, Donald Trump and his billionaire allies are literally stealing from working families in order to reduce the amount of taxes that they would have to pay. Literally robbing from the poor to give to the rich. And for anyone really wondering whether they would actually do that, we know that they will, because they've done it before. In 2017, during the first Trump presidency, Republicans seemed fine, saying they could afford hundreds of billions of dollars in permanent tax cuts for large corporations. I remember the arguments back then. This is going to grow the economy, they said. In time, it will reduce the debt, they said. That didn't happen. So today, now they're arguing that we can't afford programs that keep kids from going hungry. We can't afford the programs that keep lights on in emergency rooms. It's outrageous. In 2025, so many working families are struggling to keep up with the rising costs from Trump's chaotic tariff wars, with prices going up for groceries and other everyday goods. Many are working long hours and still struggling to make ends meet or to afford care for their loved ones. I get it. I've been there. Colleagues, as I've shared with you before, I'm the proud son of working-class parents who came to the United States from Mexico in the 1960s. I'll remind you that for 40 years, my father worked as a short-order cook, and my mom cleaned houses. On those modest salaries, they raised my sister, my brother, and I in the proud working-class community of Pacoima, California. And I remember what it was like to live paycheck to paycheck. I know how unnerving it could be, for example, when the car broke down and you listened and witnessed to your parents' debate because, on the one hand, maybe they couldn't afford the cost of repairing the car right away. But they also realized that they couldn't afford to not fix the car because they had to get to work. And I know that there's so many Americans in communities like the one I grew up in that aren't looking for handouts. That's not what we're arguing or debating in this bill. Americans just want a fair chance to work hard and provide for their family. There's pride and dignity in working hard and providing for families. That's part of the American dream. People just want a fair playing field. In a country with as much promise and profit as the United States of America, that shouldn't be too much to ask for. But not only would the Republican budget reconciliation bill be one big handout for the wealthiest Americans, it would actually make life harder for working families in order to pay for it. That's wrong, and it's cruel. At its very core, just like Trump did in 2017 with the help of Republicans in Congress, this bill is fundamentally about one thing and one thing only: cutting taxes for the wealthiest Americans and big corporations. How else do you explain the fact that the top 0.1% will see a tax cut of more than $250,000 a year, while millions of American households will actually see a reduction in their annual income or take-home pay? That's because to pay for the massive handouts to the wealthy, Republicans are gutting health care and cutting services that so many working families depend on. And they're twisting themselves into knots in order to cut around $1 trillion in health care. Cuts that would leave 16 million Americans without health insurance. We're talking about seniors. We're talking about children, Americans with disabilities, hardworking families who don't deserve to be kicked off their health insurance just so billionaires can pay less in taxes. These devastating cuts, by the way, will also close rural hospitals around the country, including in California, where so many are already struggling just to keep the doors open. And for folks listening to the debate thinking that, well, if I'm not on Medicaid, then this may not apply to me, this isn't going to hurt me, let me remind you that if your local hospital that relies on Medicaid dollars is forced to cut services or cut staff or even close its doors as a result, then yes, you too will be hurt. But the bill doesn't stop there. In this bill, Republicans cut SNAP, nutrition assistance, that critical lifeline that so many count on to literally feed their families. How much more cruel can you get? But wait, there's more. Republicans are also rolling back the historic progress we've made investing in our transition to a clean energy economy, targeting the millions of clean energy jobs that are fueling innovation and helping us stay ahead of China. The cuts to clean energy that Republicans are making in this bill will lead to higher energy costs, higher electricity bills for so many families. Now, I'm reminded that this last November, so many voters went to the polls and voted hoping for lower prices. They were desperate and looking for relief, and that's what motivated their votes. But this bill does the opposite. So I have to wonder, for my Republican colleagues who are supporting this measure, who is it that you're fighting for? Did any of you really come to Congress to take food away from the hungry? To take care away from sick children? What are you proposing be done here? Now, I've seen Republicans go back and forth on this bill for months now, I'm sure trying to decide just how much they can try to get away with. And I've heard some of the arguments that they plan to make to justify voting for this bill. Some of them will argue that we need this bill because we need to reduce the deficit. Talk about misleading. This bill adds trillions, yes, trillions of dollars to our nation's debt. So even when they try to twist the numbers and come up with the funny math, it doesn't even result in deficit reduction. And you know how you can tell? Because the Republicans included a $5 trillion increase to the debt limit in this bill. If the bill and the cuts included in the bill indeed reduce the deficit, as they claim it does, they wouldn't have needed to raise the debt limit in the process. So let's be clear. Republicans who are voting for this bill know full well it will hurt so many of their constituents. That's why behind closed doors you have Republicans handing out flyers that show just how devastating Medicaid cuts will be in states represented by Republicans. Or we hear they're discussing the burden that SNAP cuts will have on state and local governments. But because the leader of their party wants to sign this bill to celebrate the 4th of July this year, many of them will vote yes. But I'll ask again, who is this bill in service of? Who are you standing up for? Who are you fighting for? I'll tell you who I'm fighting for. I'm fighting for people like Jesus da Costa from San Diego, a home care provider who in 2016, because of his mother's full-time, who became his mother's full-time care provider when she was tragically hit by a car and became disabled. Jesus can't hold a full-time job and carry all the responsibilities of looking after his mother. So for both Jesus and his mother, Medicaid has been a lifeline. I'm fighting for him. I'm fighting for people like Tina Ewing Wilson in the Inland Empire, who remembers what it was like the last time her Medicaid benefits were cut. Tina struggles with seizures and developmental disabilities and requires care 24/7. But when the Great Recession hit and Medicaid cuts followed, Tina knew she could only afford her care by offering free room and board to caregivers. Caregivers who went out to abuse drugs and alcohol and took advantage of her financially. Tina's terrified of that possibly happening again if these Republican cuts to Medicaid impact her. I'm fighting for her. And I'm fighting for the families I met at Rady Children's Hospital, where over half of all patients are covered by Medicaid. And I'm fighting for the nurses and the caregivers who fear for their patients. They care for their patients, but they're fearing for their patients because of these proposals. For every parent across the country who's working their tail off to put food on the table for their children, but every now and then may need a helping hand. If you see these Americans, if you have constituents with similar experiences in your state, and still think that they should have less of our help, not more, then I guess we came to Congress for different reasons. If you've seen so many corporations' profits soaring and the wealth inequality in our country growing, and think that billionaires need more tax relief, then I guess we came to Congress for different reasons. And if this week you'll vote to rip these critical lifelines away from millions of Americans, because you somehow think it's the right political calculation, then surely we came to Congress for different reasons. Colleagues, it's crystal clear. I urge you to vote no on this bill and stand with me, stand with us, stand up for working families. That's what I plan to do. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.